So you're probably very familiar with this by now, but not everyone comes to church every Sunday, and some of us are perhaps checking this congregation out this morning. So a bit of history. Early in the beginning of 2019, the youth of our congregation identified mental health as an intersectional area of concern for them. And in this new missions model we've agreed to explore the places and areas of concern that we financially support through our worship and formation process as well. So we have been diving into this topic. And I have really been looking into research, not so much focused on the millennials as I have been looking at this generation called Generation iGen. And some of you, I've said, there's this book, it's called iGen, you should read it. If you have anyone in your lives who was born between 1995 and 2014, this is a generation roughly identified as iGen. People who have spent their lives not knowing a world without the internet. That's weird to think about, isn't it? My child will never know a world not connected. The reading I have done has really expanded my understanding of these young people, and I have been especially grateful for research that does not have a kids these days kind of tone. Because every generation says that about the younger generation, right? Whatever the next generation is doing, in fact, the previous generation has done to them. The more I read about the struggle and adversity this generation faces, the more I also become cognizant of the particular gifts and opportunities they offer us. One interview I listened to was two Stanford professors whose research and teaching is in education. And they focused on the idea of success and how generations, iGen, millennials, the boundaries aren't black and white, right? We have fuzzy boundaries between generations. But these generations are grappling between two worlds. For years, we have oriented our world around what do you want to be when you grow up? Think about how prevalent that question was, probably not only from your family, your extended family, but also at school, right? The educational system asked that question of us. Which means that the system is set up around a certain metric of success. Success being, what do you want to do when you grow up? But it does not succeed in supporting the creation of full, well-rounded humans. We have raised at least a few generations of humans with a definition of success at odds with what we know of wisdom. Most of us in this room were probably raised in this world with a definition of success that involves questions of what and when over why and how. We hear a lot of talk about how kids these days don't have the kind of work ethic we had as young people, or they don't know how easy they have it, or how they move through the world with an awful lot of entitlement. Just check yourself for a minute. When was the last time you thought one of those things? And I think them. I'll raise my hand. I think them all the time. But I've been really wondering about my reaction, and I think there's another way to look at it, a healthier, better way. Instead of focusing their entire lives around answering the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to do? Our young people are trying to ask, Who and how do I want to be in the world? Who and how do I want to be in the world? How wonderful is that? They are asking, what does it mean to be human? And how shall I live? Rather than, how do I climb to the top of the ladder as quickly as possible? Who do I need to be focused on impressing? How many hours of my life am I willing to sacrifice at the office, the computer, the lab? They are asking better questions about being flexible and resilient. They care more about their personal health. They see the importance of rest and relaxation, being ready and thinking through how they will put family and children ahead of money and a job. And their language reveals that they are thinking about paying attention to a journey rather than a destination. Success is a terrible context for learning. In this interview, and I will get the statistic wrong, I think, but one of the researchers was from medicine, and he teaches doctors at Stanford. And he said that every year, and you are in the medical profession, many of you, so you can maybe correct me if this is way off target. He said every year, an entire class of new physicians has to become enrolled. We have to produce an entire class of new physicians to account for the suicide of medical professionals. Success is a terrible context for learning. And I think this generation may be noticing how flawed the system is. And so they are daring, I think, to see what it looks like when perfection is not the goal, when curing is not the goal, when vulnerability is an asset and not a deficit. And as the world they create meets our rigid ideas about what it means to be a successful human, when the question of what do I do meets who do I want to be, in a system not set up to support the questions of vulnerability, presence, exquisite care, no wonder our young people are struggling with anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation in record numbers. It's a cosmic clash. One worldview meets the other. What does it mean to be human? Well, we're evolving that question, but we're in a moment of clash. I had this thing that happened this week with Moses at preschool that just emphasized for me this perspective of how the system is set up and remains set up for a particular definition of success. So one day he woke up and he said, "I don't want to go to school, Mama," and he was crying and, "Oh, my tummy hurts." And I think, you're playing me. You're playing me, kid. Are you dying? Then go to school. No, I'm a lot nicer than that, but Peter's not. So, anyway, I keep him home, and halfway through the day, he starts to tell me a story, and the story is coming out, and he's sobbing. He's sobbing as he tells me the story, which is not playing me. I have learned the difference between these two things. He says, "Mama, is reading a guessing game?" I said, "What? Is reading a guessing game?" He said, I don't know. Why are you asking me that? And out comes this story about how they're reading in preschool. Problem number 1. And all of the kids, he says, know how to read. They know how to sound out the letters, and I can't do it. And my teacher keeps calling on me, and I can't do it. And she says, And I guess. And she says, it's not a guessing game. And he says, so I can't do it, Mama. I'm not a reader. At age 5, newly turned 5, he couldn't do something. And what he heard in the place and from the people he spends 8 hours of most days with, what he heard was, you failed. And he internalized that at 5 as having something to do with who he was. The biblical text and the story of Jesus holds so much instruction for us precisely in this moment. The story of the incarnation is the story of how becoming human. Chatty Cathy's, I see you. Yes, my glasses are broken, so they're crooked on my face. I don't have to be perfect, Amber says. Ha! The millennials will lead the way. The story of how becoming human is what God intended to show us in the incarnation. It's not a story about divinity overcoming humanity or rising above our humanness to our divinity. It's a story about how divinity is found in what is human, not the other way around. We do not aspire, because of our sacred story, to rise above our humanity. We aspire to root ourselves exactly in our humanness. Our humanity is not an attribute we have received once and forever with our conception. It is a potentiality that we have to discover within us and progressively develop or destroy. The example of God's humanity in Jesus is the gift of a human who rose to the potentiality of his humanness. Becoming human is the journey then. I'm just going to take them off. They're wonky. Becoming human is the journey. Isn't that interesting? The children are leading us exactly there, and we want to fix them. Push them to try harder, do more, add more to your resume, which is resulting in a huge toll on their well-being. Studies show sleep deprivation, anxiety and depression, stress, stimulant use, and suicidal ideation. In some cases, suicide completion is off the charts. Doesn't matter where you fall on the continuum of Stanford student, community college student, high school student, middle school student. The numbers are consistent. Rather than perpetuating systems of destruction, the packaged perfection of North American culture, the rigid success of the academic system, the wealth accumulation of the economic system, the surface-level engagement of consumptive religion, what if we began to tell the truth? That really, we want to know what it means to be human too. But that is probably not intuitive for a majority of us in this room, because we were raised with a belief that what we do is more important than who we are. Meaning the focus of our upbringing was probably around success, money, grades, test scores, where we went to college. And somewhere during the 20th century, we made interior lives not just private, but optional. And I know this is true because when I talk about this spiritual life, primarily with adults over the age of 40, I am met with deep confusion and struggle to understand what I am talking about. Do you mean knowing the scripture? Doing Bible study? No. What I mean is, do you know who you are? Not what you do, or what you have accomplished, or where you're headed. And the story of the encounter between Thomas and Jesus is my favorite portrait of the humanity of Jesus and the most important truth of the resurrection story in this post-Easter season. If God was interested in communicating a story about overcoming the suffering of our humanity, why would Jesus have appeared in bodily form after the resurrection? Why not just appear as a spirit? Break through the heavens with a voice and an image like at the baptism of John? Because it was important to affirm the holiness of a particular kind of human body. Why was it necessary for the wounds of Jesus to remain? Maybe, to prove he had been the one crucified and not a stand-in for this Jesus of Nazareth. But why are they described in this reading as real wounds? Why does Thomas put his hand into the side of Jesus? Why were these not healed wounds or scars? Because we live in a world that worships artifice, but in the upside-down world of the gospel, God sports open wounds without shame or apology even after the resurrection. We will never become who we are not. And the risen Christ's body reminds us that some wounds are for keeps. Some wounds are for keeps. I will never be a woman who was not abused as a child. My sister's body will never not bear the marks from years of anorexia. Christians are a part of the problem, especially us white, mainstream Protestant Christians. We put a lot of stock in stories that turn out well. Addictions overcome, problems solved. We welcome stories of failure to an extent, but only when they've been reconciled in some way. Only when the ending is happy. Only in retrospect, when the open wound has faded to a scar. And a common instruction in preaching classes: preach from your scars, not your open wounds. And I've begun to wonder about that, because that is the exact opposite of the example of Christ, who in resurrection glory, in the moment of the very best of himself, doesn't even appear with healed wounds, much less old scars. And if the risen body of Jesus communicates how holy humanity is, then that is what is significant about the story. Even in resurrection, our bodies will always be real. Our bruised, broken, wounded, disabled, and diseased bodies are the very vessel of God. That's the holiness. That's the potentiality of being human that we are invited to discover. The recognition that God is not encountered in prepackaged perfection, in success. God is in reality. And very, very, very often, more often than not, that is failure. The really real in you. The real you. I think Christianity's best appeal could be in its willingness to embrace real bodies, real wounds, real pain. And our children are asking us questions, asking us to redefine success with them, asking us to tell our real stories, not our presentational monologues. They are asking us to help them become human. Beloved of God, it is up to us to stop pretending. We have to embrace our own wounds. We have to do this work so we can embrace our children, the children that are ours and the children that are not ours. We have to be able to embrace them the way we say we embrace them. As they are. Exactly as they are. In spite of nothing. But because of who they are. Jesus said, the children will lead you. Jesus said, the children will lead you. I think that's our cue to pay attention, to learn from what our children are telling us, and to follow their lead. Amen.